what we all do here really does make a difference to individual human beings and to whole towns. So thank you very much for coming out.
And Leslie brought a map that just, it gives you a really good idea of where these real places are and were, like Namie, which really is gone. But
And the town of Putney adopted the town of Tate up
which
here.
is up here. Kauuche is right up there. So
And
it's
which is the one Brattleboro adopted?
Namie, which is right here.
It's 5 miles from the reactors.
Yes.
5 miles northwest, just like us.
Yeah.
And over here, there's a little column that you can look at that has distances. These are the distances from Vermont Yankee, a list of local towns, so that you can compare it with these distances
So
here.
I'll
Can we pass it around?
Yeah, you
I'll
can
pass
pass
it
it
around. It's very.
So now we're at the third year of melting down. I mean, most anniversaries are a one-day thing. But as someone else said today, this is an anniversary that we are going to be commemorating for decades to come. I'd like to open with a poem that was written by an inspirational anti-nuclear activist named Heidi Hutner. She's in the Indian Point area. She's also an environmental studies professor at Stony Hill. And she, every year, she educates her students about the realities of nuclear power. And she brings them to demonstrations. And they are at the Japanese consulate today. And that's how they are remembering March 11th. This week we remember the March 11th, 2011 disaster in Fukushima, Japan. We remember the earthquake, the tsunami, and the multiple nuclear plant meltdowns that have released untold, literally untold amounts of radiation into the atmosphere, soil, water, and oceans. We remember the many dead, the many afraid and traumatized, the many displaced forever from their homes and their farms. We remember those who now live in fear of future cancers and genetic mutations. We remember the many acknowledged and unacknowledged victims of radiation poisoning and contamination. We remember the children who wear Geiger counters to school each day, and their parents who ache and worry about the radioactive food, air, and water they consume. We remember the Buddha of the radiation zone, who cares for the abandoned animals. We remember and we pray for the future generations everywhere as radiation travels and circulates throughout the planet and remains hazardous for tens of thousands of years. We remember and we honor those who fight against nuclear ecocide. We remember and express our gratitude, especially to the thousands of Japanese mothers and green activists who protest on behalf of all beings of this planet. We remember. Thank you. So we're going to open with a couple of short films. One has been taken off the internet. The title of it has something to do with how the new Prime Minister of Japan wants to restart the reactors. It was a 20-minute video, and it was taken down today. It was about organic farmer whose father hung himself after he was told that his farm could no longer, and that politicized his son.
Who took it down?
We don't know who took it down.
So we don't have it?
It's not available. I know. Yeah, it's also about another father who would return to Namie over and over again to try to find the remains of his 7-year-old daughter who died on March 11th. And it was also about 2 doctors who specialize in radiation and who said that the ways that the TEPCO and the government were handling radiation studies of their people was insufficient. And that it was made by an Australian filmmaker, and it's gone, just today.
One of the more other really powerful things I remember from seeing that is there were mothers, local mothers, who were paying, you know, a lot of people there are really not doing well because they've lost their jobs. They don't believe the government health service, and they were going to private health services to get their children monitored for thyroid cancer because they feel like the government is not monitoring in an honest way. They feel like the government's just trying to cover up what the results might be. Those moms were very powerful.
So we open with a little clip on Namie.
Workers here in Fukushima City, about 40 miles from the failed nuclear reactor, clean rooftops, collect the runoff, and transfer it to designated storage facilities. The pink ribbons on this sports field mark the areas where all topsoil has been removed as part of the decontamination efforts. But the slow progress of the cleanup in many areas has left more than 80,000 refugees in limbo, still hoping to return home, and increasingly questioning the central government's commitment. Directly in the path of the 2011 tsunami, and just a few miles from the reactor, the town of Namie was fully evacuated. This September, the government postponed the completion date of the cleanup here indefinitely. It's now considered safe enough to visit. Gene Ichi Hayakawa and his wife Mikiko stopped by their former home.
Now, to be honest, I don't want to live in this house unless it's repaired. But I've already bought a new lot in Minamisoma, and I'm going to build our new house there.
Despite the empty streets and the wreckage, the people of Namie don't call it a ghost town. To them, it remains their furusato, their hometown. But they say they don't know what or whom to believe about its future.
However much they say, whatever they say they are going to do. I mean, they said they would fix things, but nothing has changed, and it's over 2.5 years. They're lies, huh? And they can't handle it anyway. Many here have given up.
Radiation dosimeters are necessary equipment each time Shosei and Sueko Tanaka visit their former home.
I want to expect good things. Many people say we're being lied to, that they can't fix things. But I'd like to think things will improve.
Some believe the selection of Tokyo to host the 2020 Olympics will pressure the government and TEPCO to spend whatever it takes to complete nuclear containment and decontamination efforts. Others aren't so sure. After evacuating from Namie, Kuniko Watanabe reestablished her business in the nearby city of Minamisoma.
A lot of my customers are worried that the government will give us less attention because of the Olympics. We still need more construction workers, so all of us have anxiety that these workers will go to the Olympic project instead.
This is Steve Ross reporting for the New York Times in Namie, Japan.
Anderson, who will talk about what's happening at the reactors 3 and 4? 3 and 4. 3 and 4.
Hi, I'm Arnie Gunderson from Fairwinds. During the past 6 months, the eyes of the world have been focused on the challenges Tokyo Electric is facing in its removal of spent nuclear fuel from Fukushima Daiichi Unit 4's spent fuel pool. With more than 1,500 bundles to be removed, it'll take TEPCO at least 18 months to complete this delicate process. In comparison, if Unit 4's fuel racks were not damaged, and this was a normal fuel transfer operation, the entire process would take only 2 to 3 months. Thus far, TEPCO has managed to remove about 15% of the fuel bundles, and these were the easy ones that were barely damaged. They'll take more than a year of moving fuel bundles before TEPCO even gets to the severely damaged bundles. On January 31, 2014, TEPCO released a report entitled TEPCO's Fukushima Nuclear Power Plant Roadmap, and it contains some astounding information regarding Unit 3. While the report is in Japanese, Fairwind's board member Chiho Kineko has translated several pages for us to share with you today. We've also downloaded the entire Japanese document to our website, and volunteer translators fluent in Japanese have begun the arduous task of translating it. Please volunteer if you want to assist in this project. When Unit 3 exploded in what engineers called a detonation shockwave, it experienced the worst explosion on the Fukushima Daiichi site. A detonation shockwave travels faster than the speed of sound and shatters objects in its path. While Unit 1 also exploded, the energy of its explosion was much less than the Unit 3 explosion. The explosion in Unit 1 was what engineers call a deflagration shockwave. Although the roofs blew off the reactor buildings in both explosions, the destruction caused by the supersonic explosive shockwave caused significantly more damage in Unit 3. The real unanswered problem that regulators in Japan, the US, and throughout the world do not want to discuss is that no nuclear containment in the world can withstand a detonation shockwave like the one inside Fukushima Daiichi Unit 3. However, in order to continue operating or to begin restarting nuclear plants around the world, nuclear regulators are pretending that the detonation shockwave in Unit 3 never happened. Let's look at the newly released TEPCO report by examining Tokyo Electric's sketch of the rubble in the Unit 3 fuel pool. It's on page 149 of the report. Look at the large object. This is the refueling bridge, and it's used to remove the nuclear fuel. Normally, this bridge weighs more than 35 tons, and it straddles the spent fuel pool. The force below the bridge was so great that this 35-ton bridge was lifted up and dropped right into the spent fuel pool. The uplift and the destruction of this 35-ton piece of steel is a clear indication that the blast came from below the bridge, and it supports my theory and that of other nuclear engineers that a prompt, moderated criticality occurred in Unit 3. Now let's look at the actual data table on page 150 of the report and the description of what's been found in the Unit 3 spent fuel pool. Thanks again to Ms. Kankeko for her translation. The TEPCO table on page 150 shows us that in addition to the 35-ton refueling bridge that fell into the Unit 3 pool, a long refueling mast used to lift the fuel upward also fell in. The refueling mast weighs more than 1.5 tons, and like a knight's lance, it fell straight into the fuel. Furthermore, there is at least 180 steel reinforcing rods, each weighing 100 pounds, 100 pieces of deck plate weighing 400 pounds each, and approximately 2 tons of the roof trusses, many pieces of concrete, each about the size of a human head, and at least 2.5 tons of railroad track, upon which the refueling bridge used to operate, have also collapsed into the pool. Do the math. The bottom line here is that TEPCO has acknowledged that at least 50 tons of rubble has fallen on the top and into the spent fuel pool at Unit 3. What does this 50-ton pile of debris mean to the Unit 3 spent fuel pool and its cleanup? Imagine a fully loaded 18-wheel tractor trailer suddenly falling from the sky and landing in the spent fuel pool. Obviously, much of the Unit 3 spent fuel and its critical spacing must have been damaged, making it extraordinarily difficult to remove any of the fuel from these broken down racks. Unit 3 is in a condition never envisioned and never imagined by the BWR nuclear power plant designers, the fabricators, the contractors, the engineers, or the operators. The meltdown at Unit 3 has created a radiation field that is so high that human access has thus far been impossible, even 3 years after the accident. And because such an accident was never planned for, no robotics are in place, and the current design could not accommodate them even if the robots existed that were designed to operate in such a hot and radioactive environment. Preparations to remove Unit 3's fuel cannot exist. I wish there was a solution that had been tried elsewhere, but there's no historical precedent for removing Unit 3's highly damaged fuel from such a highly radioactive environment. In a building that's been compromised structurally from an earthquake and the explosion, the fuel must be removed quickly and safely. Because the nuclear meltdown immediately next to the spent fuel pool in Unit 3 created such an extraordinarily high lethal radiation field, I think that the fuel bundles in Unit 3 may have to be cut out of the racks using robotic cutting tools, and that this technological and engineering feat has never been attempted in any industrial setting. While the ongoing fuel removal in Unit 4 is difficult, what lies ahead in Unit 3 is much, much worse. Removing the severely damaged fuel and then what remains after the nuclear meltdown will challenge the best engineering minds in the world for generations to come. I'm Arnie Gunderson. I'll keep you informed.
When Japan was hit by a giant tsunami in 2011, hundreds of thousands forced to flee literally saw their lives washed away. Promises were made that it would only be a matter of time before their homes were rebuilt. But as RT's Alexei Yarashevsky found out, those people are still waiting.
This woman can only fit me and my cameraman into her new home. She apologizes, but there's simply no room for the whole crew inside. She's one of resettlers from the Fukushima area, forced to leave their homes amid the 2011 nuclear disaster.
When the tsunami hit, we were told to pack only necessary things and run away. They said it would be only for 2-3 days. Now, living in this cage of a house, returning to our old house is a dream, which we know won't ever come true. We are being fed with promises of a bigger house, but that's as far as it gets, promises.
This is just one of the quickly erected residential areas where Fukushima exiles have relocated to. There are hundreds of makeshift camps scattered across the region, accommodating more than 300,000 people.
All of the 400 resettlers living in this particular area used to have large houses before the Fukushima accident. Now they're forced to live in these 30-square-meter dwellings. They were told that this would be just a short-term measure, but it seems in their case, the old saying, "there's nothing more permanent than temporary," suits very well.
The majority of these people are pensioners suffering from different ailments. They are jobless, just as surprisingly many of their younger neighbors. This man used to run a profitable venture. Now he barely makes ends meet.
I had a $100,000 a year business producing honey. Now it's destroyed forever, just like my life. On top of all that, I'm offered neither financial compensation nor any job. That's why I'm taking TEPCO to court.
The government says it's working on improving conditions for resettlers, but with the Fukushima clear-up draining billions of dollars out of the state budget, it could take years, maybe even a decade, to do that. Even local officials are being kept in the dark.
The government says it's building bigger houses, but will finish it in no sooner than 2 years. And not all of these people will be able to live in those. That's as little as we, officials on the ground, are told by the central government.
Fukushima means a happy island in Japanese, but that's the last word these people would ascribe to their lives, which are unlikely to ever return to normal, especially with the government admitting the area around the nuclear site might never again be suitable to live in. Alexei Rashevsky, RT, reporting from Japan.
So one thing that we learned from our studies last year is Namie and Itate and Kawauchi were all these beautiful villages. Really lots of farming, some organic farming. That, you saw that fellow as a beekeeper. When you looked at the pictures, sometimes it looked so much like New England, especially the pictures in the fall. And so trying to put myself in their shoes and imagine not just being having my home taken away, but then going to live in a big city on a concrete pad. I just my heart just goes out to them. So it would be wonderful if we had a nice cheerful video to end with, but honestly we don't. But what we do have is Chiho Kineko. And Chiho brought us personalized people's stories for us when she first came down 3 years ago. And since that time, you have found your life changed.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. This past year, Chiho translated for the former Prime Minister of Japan as he and the former NRC Commissioner and others spoke about how all of the nuclear reactors in the world should really be phased out. And they spoke in Boston and New York, and Chiho translated for them. So we are very honored that you have taken the time to come and be with us today. And I just, Chiho has recently come back from Japan, and I, like you, look forward to hearing what she says.
So I think it's when Leslie called me, emailed me, okay. She said she's going to show these videos, and she thought maybe I can talk a little bit about my last trip. But then there's so much that I could be talking about that I just didn't know what to say. And so I decided that if you have like specific things that you like to know, maybe we do Q&A after this, right?
Yep.
And then so I try to address to the best of my knowledge. But then for now, I ended up writing something to speak to you today. And so if I'd like to read from the notes. The situation at the Fukushima Daiichi continues to be dire. Every so often we hear the news of yet the highest level of radioactivity detected in the monitoring well, or there was another breach in the tanks that are holding contaminated water. But an average person in Japan seems to be paying less and less attention to that news. People do get used to things, even when they are extremely abnormal. On this third anniversary of the Fukushima Daiichi disaster, I'd like to talk about an event that took place 60 years ago. March 1st, 1954, it was the date of a covert operation called the Castle Bravo, the experimental detonation of a hydrogen bomb at Bikini Atoll, Marshall Islands. The power of this H-bomb turned out to be much, much more powerful than what the U.S. military had calculated, and many people ended up being negatively impacted by the fallout, including the residents of downwind islands. The fallout also hit 23 crew members of a Japanese tuna fishing vessel. It's called Daigo Fukuryumaru. It literally translates as number 5 lucky dragon. how ironic. And which they both happen to be located 100 miles from the test site. I have heard interviews given by one of the surviving fishermen, Matashichi Oishi, who was 20 years old at the time. He witnessed brilliant lights on the horizon early on the morning of March 1st, 1954. A little later, a deep rumbling sound came up from underneath. Then a huge mushroom cloud was seen on the horizon, but no one on the ship knew what it was. And in a couple of hours, the mushroom cloud came rushing towards the ship, and pure white ash descended on him and the other crew members. They still didn't know what it was. The ash was neither hot nor cold, and soon after, they experienced nausea and dizziness. 2 or 3 days later, the skin that had been exposed to the ash, which really was blown up coral reef, developed burns. 10 days later, their hair started to fall out. The vessel managed to come back to the shore of Japan on March 14th. It's speculated that they intentionally did not send SOS signals because they fear the possibility of being sunk by the US military. The Japanese government also tested and found some tuna that was radioactive. Contrary to the assurance by the US government that the ocean would dilute the radioactive pollutant to a negligible level. By the end of the year 1955, over 30 million Japanese people signed a petition calling for a ban on nuclear weapons. The rising anti-nuclear and anti-US sentiments were just what the US didn't need at the time. So as early as April 1954, which is a month later, the US government's Operations Coordinating Board, OCB, an executive committee created by President Eisenhower that previous year, issued an internal document titled Outline Checklist of U.S. Actions to Offset Unfavorable Japanese Attitudes to the H-bomb and Related Developments. So I know it sounds macabre, but it's true. And an OCB report also recommended that the U.S. should offer to build an experimental nuclear power reactor in Japan. The U.S. had to spin the image of nuclear technology in Japanese people's mind from that of a lethal war technology to the symbol of stability and prosperity. So the U.S. government offered Japan, practically a U.S. colony after the World War II, an opportunity to share the economic and strategic benefit of the burgeoning nuclear industry. The Japanese government willingly accepted the deal for its own ambitions, and it soon became one of the most aggressive champions of nuclear power. In 1955, the Atomic Energy Basic Law was enacted in Japan, and by mid-1960s, Japan had its first commercial nuclear power plant. This is but one tiny example of how nuclear power has been forced upon us. I mentioned the name of one Daigo Fukuryumaru crew member, Matashi Oishi, but there are many, many people whose names we don't even know, who nevertheless were exposed, got sick, and probably died from the fallout. And the residents of the Marshall Islands were forced to evacuate in the aftermath of this test, only to be returned in a couple of years to their contaminated homeland, where they got further exposed through the water they drank and the food that they harvested. Mr. Oishi received 2 million yen, which was worth about $5,500 at the time, from the US government. Some Japanese people called him all kinds of names for receiving the money. And he also experienced discrimination against him for being the exposed. So he relocated and he hid his true identity for many years, just as some people from Hiroshima and Nagasaki had done, and just as some people from Fukushima today are doing. The money he received from the US government stripped him of the right to complain forever, even when his child was stillborn and when he subsequently developed liver cancer. For all these decades, through several nuclear disasters, including 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl, through all those nuclear weapons tests, with all those nuclear arsenals still, depleted uranium arsenals still being dropped in Iraq and elsewhere, with all the abandoned uranium mines that are contaminating the waters and the soil in the upper Great Plains and compromising the health of not only the residents of the plains, but everybody in this country who eats the food that comes from there, and with all the smoke that comes out of operating coal plants that use coal from the plains that is naturally laced with uranium, we are forced to allow more and more radiation into our environment and into our bodies. Radiation exposure is difficult to quantify, and its effect on the human body are not clearly known, partially because a lot of information in the past, from the past disasters is classified and often manipulated. What Mr. Oishi experienced on the ship in 1954 was an acute form of radiation exposure. But even for him, any connection between his illness and his incident has been denied. The same pattern is repeated over and over. The end of this month will mark the 35th anniversary of the 3 Mile Island accident. There are anecdotes of human illnesses and mutations in the local population. However, officially, there has been no recognition of abnormalities in the health of the affected residents. Then I think about what's unfolding in Japan today. I sense something grave is happening. I have heard many Fukushima people's personal accounts of their family members or friends dying suddenly. One such example was still just a baby. And actually it's not just people in Fukushima. People are sicker in Tokyo. And it's not just people who are sicker. I met a home gardener who lives in Kawamata, Fukushima, which is 30 miles from Fukushima Daiichi reactor. It's not even evacuation zone. She grew loofahs. It's basically the spongy kukubite plant. Last year, from the seeds that she saved from the year before, 2012, she tentatively planted just to see how it will, not to eat or anything, and then last year she planted seeds that she saved from the year 2012. Well, she found flower buds just directly growing out of the fruit, mutations. And some of her beans, which also her own seeds, were abnormally gigantic. Near Fukushima City, another person saw a frog so severely deformed that at first it was difficult to tell that it was a frog, save for its hopping. I too experienced unusual symptoms during my month-long stay in Japan last December and January, this January. Skin rash that didn't heal, scratchy throat when I was in Fukushima. Something is happening, and yet we cannot prove anything. The IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, and Fukushima Medical University are working together to collect and collate the health data of the Fukushima residents. Many residents feel that this is just a show, or worse yet, just for the sake of collecting secret data. Many fear that the experts already have a foregone conclusion. That conclusion that if they get ill, it is not because of the Fukushima Daiichi accident. As of December last year, of the 254,280 young Fukushima children who were 18 years old or younger at the time of the power plant disaster, which is basically 250,000 kids, 74 were found to either have thyroid cancer or are suspected of having thyroid cancer. 33 of them had already gone through surgery. There are different statistics for the rate of thyroid cancer among children prior to the Fukushima Daiichi. Some says 1 to 3 in 1 million. Another says maybe 17 in 1 million. Compared to either of them, the current number in Fukushima is staggering. But the Japanese and the international experts have maintained that this is not related to the Fukushima Daiichi disaster. The same pattern is repeated over and over. How long will this pattern continue? Many Japanese people are confronted by different choices they have to make each day. Whether or not to wear a mask, whether or not to send their children away from their home in Fukushima, whether or not to buy the spinach that may contain cesium, whether or not to eat fish because now it's known that the huge amounts of strontium-90 are pouring into the Pacific Ocean from Fukushima Daiichi. But the most important choice was not available to us. We were not allowed to choose whether or not we would accept all the unearthed uranium and the resulting radionuclides in our life. The Fukushima Daiichi disaster opened the door for me to see how this is not a mere Japanese crisis. It's a crisis that transcends geography and time. What can we do now? A big part of me feels it's too late to remedy. But we must at least try to find ways to slow the pace of nuclear contamination. Because once we have lost everything that sustains us, from our soil to air to water, our home, our community, our family, no amount of money can restore them. Thank you for being here today and for having expressed your concerns for the Japanese situation for the past 3 years. Your compassion has given me so much strength. I'm also grateful to the courageously committed people in Japan. The mothers in the 20s and 30s and 40s who tirelessly petitioned the local government and the schools to do more to protect their children. The citizen scientists who are testing soil and food on their own and sharing it with others. The labor advocates who are shining a light on the abominable treatment of the Fukushima Daiichi workers who are jeopardizing their lives each moment. The doctors who express alarm after having seen the jump in health abnormalities among children in the Tokyo area. They are the real heroes, especially given the environment in Japan today, which is getting more and more hostile to those who criticize the government policies. I hope to keep witnessing what's happening and to seek truth. And I pray for all the souls of this planet. So, sorry, I didn't talk about Fukushima so much. But Randy.
Chiho, thanks so much. And in relation to what you were saying at the end just now about it being harder and harder for people in Japan to criticize, can you tell us something about what we heard on the news just the other day of tens of thousands of Japanese protesting in Tokyo?
There are a lot of protests, but then there are specific protests against the newly enacted law at the end of last year, which is called the Special Secrecy Protection Law, or something like that. Basically, if the government decides to say, designate certain information as a national security concern or something, then journalists are prohibited from basically making, sort of an investigative talk about it. People who do so can be prosecuted now. And I think there was a huge outcry in public. But somehow the government just rammed it through within very few days, in a matter of few days of argument, and just passed it. It was amazing.
What I heard on the news, Chiho, was that, again, I think it was yesterday, day before, that and maybe Leslie, you might have sent it around, is that they were actually the tens of thousands that were in Tokyo heading toward, is it the parliament or whatever it's called, the dais,
yeah.
We're demanding that none of the closed nuclear reactors, which is all of them, be restarted.
Oh, okay, that protest.
Yeah, and that Japan move immediately to developing a 100% renewable energy program.
Yes, so even though the current administration, which has been in place for a year and 3 months now, they're very pro-nuclear and pro-business. So all they want to do is to restart all the possible reactors, which are all idle right now. But then all the polls show that the majority of Japanese people do not want nuclear power. The majority of Japanese would like Japan to go nuclear free in the future. If it's not possible immediately, they would like that. So I think what the government is doing is actually against the people's will, majority will. So yes, there are people protesting. Yeah.
A glimmer of hope. Not for what has already happened.
Yeah.
But for the future.
Yes.
Could you talk a bit about the workers at Fukushima right now? I mean, how many there are, what kind of work rotations they're on, what conditions they're working under? Just has anything?
Well, I think what's happening is that a lot of workers have already reached their maximum allowable, exposure.
How are they inducing new waves of workers to come in and take over?
Which is hard because the money, the salary or pay.
Yeah.
Some people get per diem, if you can believe it, is being cut back.
Yeah.
Because of those cost-cutting measures that the TEPCO supposedly have to, comply with the government agreement. They are basically squeezing all the things into the marginal areas, peripheral areas, which is all the subcontractors, sub-subcontractors. They're getting squeezed. So people who are actually doing the work at Fukushima Daiichi today, cleanup work, they are completely untrained, unskilled. I mean, some of them are trained, but they're recruiting completely unskilled people from anywhere.
They're constricted.
And there's also speculation that the for homeless people are being kind of shipped too.
I've read that the Japanese mafia has been given the role of conscripting people to go clean up the reactors.
I cannot vouch for it, but I think everybody, probably pretty much thinks that's what's happening.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of people that we saw mentioned that there was a lawsuit, like class action, I would assume lawsuit against TEPCO. Can you tell us more about?
There's so many lawsuits happening. Class.
Is there one that seems to have traction, or?
Well, what happened was, I don't know if you remember, a year ago, I was also asking you to sort of help encourage the prosecution in Fukushima to take up this case of criminally charging 33 TEPCO officials and scientists. Yeah. What happened to that? They sat on the petition. I think in Japan they had something over 20,000 people signed, for that petitioning the prosecution to investigate TEPCO. Prosecution took their time, months and months, deciding whether they're going to take up the case. And then, immediately after Tokyo Olympic was awarded to Japan, like within a day or two, Fukushima prosecution office shipped the case to Tokyo prosecution office. And within a day, Tokyo prosecution office decided they're not going to take up the case. So in the sort of a chaos of euphoria, they shipped to Tokyo, and then it's over. It didn't go anywhere. So they're going to start over from a different angle. But I think it's sort of a court system in Japan hasn't been very helpful to people in general.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? And that's about the USS Reagan people, the US sailors that are suing TEPCO?
Well, they're suing here, though, right? In America or in Japan?
They're suing TEPCO.
But in Japan's court? In Japan's court?
They sue in the U.S. because they're part of the U.S. military.
Oh, okay. Well, so they're suing some outrageous amount of money, right? Like a compensation. So the Ronald Reagan was a ship that was a friendship operation right after tsunami, and they were basically just close to the reactor. I mean, on the coast of Fukushima, and they got a lot of sailors got exposed. I mean, they got acute radiation, right, burn and everything, and so they are suing TEPCO, but I am not sure how it's going to go because none of the presidents in the past, as I said, seem to, award that kind of thing to, just make that connection. And if they should be awarded some compensation, then that will open the door for Japanese, right, which people love to see. But then, you can't imagine what chaos that would be too. I mean, so I don't think that the government would allow that to happen. I'm sorry.
I just had a question. I know there was a petition a while back to allow, encourage TEPCO to allow people who actually had potentially better ideas than what TEPCO's doing to try to clean up what's, disaster at Fukushima. Is TEPCO at this point, I haven't heard of this, working with any other organizations, any, scientific organizations or
well, they are working with a lot of consultants and things like that, but mostly I think Japanese. Or if foreign, maybe it's U.S. and France because they're sending a lot of experts, nuclear experts. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yes.
I've got two questions. One question is how long will it take before they decide to pour concrete on the entire site? Two. That's one question. The second question is, what is the effect that you've seen by the nationalization of TEPCO? By TEPCO having been taken over a majority stake by the Japanese government?
But I think it's still operating almost as if it has some kind of autonomy, because the information from the site is almost exclusive that the TEPCO, only TEPCO seem to know. That's my feeling.
All right.
Yeah, and the pouring concrete, I don't know if it's possible because it's leaking from underneath as well. And also it's volatile, like Arnie was saying, you can't go near it in like Unit 3. It's so radioactive that no one can go near it. So it's just that they are estimating and guessing what it might be, right? With sort of a remotely controlled cameras and things like that.
My understanding is Unit 1 and Unit 2 are too hot for anybody to get near also, right?
Yeah, but not compared to Unit 3. I think Unit 3 is the worst.
And if the rods wouldn't be in water, then there would be an explosion. So to cover that,
you have to keep
you have no way
water.
But then you have no way of continuing to do that. So it would not be wise.
That brings up the question of water. There are untold gallons of radioactive water being added every day, And then I've heard that there is a program, there is a process, there is machinery being constructed to decontaminate the water so it can be dumped into the ocean. Is that real? Is there really a process that can decontaminate
They
that?
talk about it, but nothing has worked so far. I mean, I think they would like to see that happen. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. But then the reality is that they can't even ensure that all the tanks that are storing water are secure. I mean, they're leaking. You know, something happens. Even the other day, I think there, you know, a lot of snow. It's been cold winter in Japan too. So all the frost heave. I don't know what happened, but one of the tanks, basically concrete base, got a little whacked or something. So it's leaking, and strontium 90 is bad. It goes straight to your bone, right? And if bioaccumulates in fish bone, if you eat fish bone, that is. And so Japanese people eat fish. That's a problem. And fish can go anywhere, right? Up and down Pacific. That's a problem. Yes.
One of the things with the water tanks, I mean, I don't know anything about this, and I'm not a scientist, but it just seems like these hastily built water tanks must be incredibly vulnerable to earthquakes.
Yes, yes, that's what Arnie would say. Yeah, they're not seismically something. Yeah, correct. Whatever.
And I have to keep building them as the time goes on, and so if it takes 50 years to dismantle it, and we have got how many water tanks?
It's not a remedy, right? It's a patchwork. Well, sis, go ahead. Oh, yeah, Betsy.
Just wondering if you got a sense of the psyche of people in Tokyo, because you were talking about people getting sick there, and a sense of how that shifted from day one, and because that seems like the driving force. If people are really afraid of it, they will.
I think people who, was worried initially already left Tokyo area. They went further south. A lot of people actually did go further south because Tokyo area, some parts of Tokyo has a lot of hot spots. And radiation level in Tokyo, I walk around with borrowed Geiger counter, and I know that the distance between Fukushima Daiichi to my hometown in northern Japan and Fukushima Daiichi to Tokyo, it's about the same, 150 miles or whatever. And some Tokyo area radiation level is higher than my hometown. No, it's spotty, but so it's Tokyo. So many people live there. And that's amazing, extraordinary. So that when the Tokyo Olympic was awarded to Japan, I think the Prime Minister went to the Olympic committees and just pitched that everything is safe in Tokyo. And people in Fukushima, well, first of all, they were really hurt because they're basically forgotten at that point. They realized, all he talks about Tokyo, how Fukushima is contained, which is not. But he said it to the world. And so people in Fukushima are basically just forgotten people, they felt. But they also felt that Tokyo is not safe either. And they're not telling the truth to the world.
Is the Olympics scheduled, Chiho, for Tokyo itself?
Yeah.
2020,
yeah.
I'm wondering if there's a way for us to begin a publicity campaign around the Olympics, just to make it known from here that Tokyo, 150 miles from Fukushima, is hotter than your parents' town. And to know that for these young athletes who have given their lives to their sports, that you don't want to go breathing deeply where there's hot spots.
So much money is involved in the Olympics.
Yes, ma'am.
Plus, no one wants to admit that their home is contaminated. It's just like here, the farmer across from Vermont Yankee doesn't want to admit that there's emissions that are harming his organic dairy herd. Then he would have no value to his property. I mean, it's the same there, I assume. But you mentioned the group of doctors in Tokyo that have been courageous and have been stepping out. And I find that when things emanate from the medical community, they tend to have the most weight. And
what happened, one of the doctors who came out with an incredible study on his own. He has his own clinic. He, I think, really tested something like 1,000 children's blood who came to his clinic, and found a significant drop in some filio, I can't remember the name, some component of white blood cell was significantly lower than average, which basically can indicate a number of things, right? I mean, damaged by radiation, sure, but then your blood cell, if that's damaged, that's your immune system, so it can open door for a lot of disease. But that doctor decided he is going to close his clinic. He did actually, and he's moving south.
Is he pressured also from the government?
I don't know. And another doctor, I actually met at Caldecott's symposium last year. She's from furthest. She actually was in Tokyo but moved further south, and we've been in touch. But she emailed me the other day that she's a little bit afraid of voicing her opinions given the environment today, because a lot of people are charged by the government for, I don't know, whatever, doing something that the government doesn't want.
Are you at risk?
I don't know. I hope not. But if I die suddenly, maybe, you figure out something, right? Right?
Have you had trouble getting in and out of the country?
No.
That has not happened.
No, I don't think it's that. But I am very sort of weary, or if that's the word, wary. Yeah, that anything can be construed to, be harmful or something. But that I don't think. What I'm trying to do is just to speak what I see. So I'm not fabricating anything.
But these other people aren't also.
Why? If I die tomorrow, that's okay.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. Okay, Maria.
I have a question. Well, actually, I heard on the radio that most of the deaths in the Fukushima area come from all farmers that are despondent in the press because they lost the lands, etc. They don't say that it's nothing related to sicknesses, but they die because they are depressed and they are enemies. How that is received by the people there is that, what can you tell us about that?
Well, there's an official term called the disaster-related death. In other words, a lot of people die directly in tsunami and an earthquake. So that's a disaster, death by disaster. Natural disaster. But related death basically is that the people died while they're evacuated, or, that sort of things. And current government is specifically trying to address that, which is interesting. So they're saying, well, we have to prevent people from dying while they're evacuated. But I'm sort of reading between the lines, saying, well, therefore maybe people, are they trying to say that the evacuation is bad for people, therefore people should be returned home? I don't know. I am not sure. But apparently, officially, I read the stats 2 days ago, over 1,600 Fukushima Fukushima people's deaths being attributed to related death. But it's not the same as they died from exposure. They died in the process of evacuation, or they die while they're away.
They're calling it depression and
Depression or just, yeah,
suicide and
whatever. So, go ahead.
I was remembering last year when you had the photographs, and there was the black stuff on the sidewalks.
Oh, yeah. I don't know.
Oh, well, that has been identified.
It has?
Yeah, they just figured it out.
It's nuclear fuel.
It was?
Yeah.
Oh.
The actual fuel itself.
Yeah.
From number 3, plutonium.
Chad, can I show some pictures?
Yeah.
I mean, if you can scroll through. I have a lot of photos, but I haven't sorted yet. And so...
It'll take just a minute
okay.
for the screen to warm back up again.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Whoever.
Just quickly, can you explain the reference in the poem that you read at the beginning to the
That was
Buddha?
Leslie read.
Oh, Leslie read.
Yeah.
But will either of you, the Buddha of
The man who goes into to his farm.
Goes into his farm.
The abandoned they call him the Buddha, but I think it's a nickname for him.
Right.
The man who has stayed behind taking care of all the animals. It
Yeah.
started with him taking care of his own cows, and now it's kind of extended to all of the animals that come
This
to
is the
him.
guy who was out
he's-
and then he went back in.
Yeah, he went back in and he
Yeah.
stayed back in essentially. Chain smoked cigarettes. He's like, what the hell? I'm going to die anyways, you know. And he just appeared as part of this past weekend, part of a Fukushima demonstration in France, which was not covered by mainstream media here at all. But they had, I think, 40,000 people who went to a reactor site that is trying to get started. They haven't actually started the reactor yet. And he spoke there and was honored there. So I guess I don't know who's taking care of the animals, but that's what the reference to the Buddha of the animals is.
I don't need to explain, but if you want to know, this is what the evacuation zone will look like next month, because they're reconfiguring, and so reclassifying, redesignating, and so this red area is going to be area that people cannot go back at least 5 years, and then means pretty much for a long time. Go ahead.
Could you give us a sense if Fukushima was here? Like how large that area, you're familiar with
This is
Keene
Fukushima. This is Fukushima right here.
But just if,
Okay,
if it was
yeah.
here,
Okay.
like how much land would we be talking about evacuated from here to Keene? Would be, you know what I'm saying? Just give us some flavor.
How far is Kawaguchi? To 12 miles?
12 miles, like
Yeah.
same as Greenfield.
Yeah.
So that's 12 miles. 10 miles, I guess.
Yeah,
20 kilometers.
Yeah, 20 kilometers right there, okay. Yeah. So actually, I look at the stats, and the amount of people who will fall in this red zone, population, would be something like 25,000 people. Is that a lot? Is that not a lot? I don't know. Depends how you think, right?
Yeah.
And then yellow area is considered to be restricted area. In other words, you need permit to go in.
The yellow or the green?
Yellow. The green, you can go in and out, but it's still quasi-designated as sort of elevated radiation level. Well, if international experts say that the 1 millisieverts per year or less is recommended for people, well, this green area will be up to 20 millisieverts.
Oh.
That's a lot. That's a lot. And then I think yellow would be between 20 and 50. And the red would be above 50. So we're talking about very high radiation. Next, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so it's kind of an odd shape.
Yeah.
that It's making, are those political lines? Or
No,
are
I think
those-
it's fallout.
That's fallout, okay.
Yeah. So they're basically, well, these are town lines, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But, and this wasn't originally, 20 kilometer, 12-mile zone right
Okay.
here. Originally from here. I think this was the zone that the red, circle.
So the green is the
It
zone.
used to be. But then now they've just, yesterday? No. they declassified this particular portion of this Tamura.
That just happens to be a town.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
They just declassified here. Used to be in a sort of an evacuation zone. And I know people who live in this town. They say this is outrageous because they know how radioactive the whole area is. But they've been furiously decontaminating since last year, or maybe 2 years ago. And I think to be able to say that, okay, now this whole town is, outside of evacuation zone, maybe that has some political meaning. I don't know. But they really rushed to declassify that.
It's right next to the hottest.
I know, that's bizarre, right?
Yeah.
That's bizarre.
They've removed a considerable amount of soil
Yep.
from the surface.
Yep.
Where are they putting that?
Well,
and how are they keeping that from contaminating other places?
well, it's impossible not to contaminate other places.
Yeah.
But they basically designate, I think, that town and which town was that? One of these towns, Naraha, I think it's going to be basically interim sort of a storage, repository. They're going to be. Yeah. Futaba too? Okuma and Futaba. And Naraha too, I think. But what's happening is that they're also contaminated wood debris from tsunami and other things, right? Because a lot of buildings collapsed, and not just from Fukushima, but all up and down the coast, and that had to be taken care of. And how to take care of that has become a huge problem, and it has become a huge scandal because government spent a lot of money and paid a lot of contractors and incinerators and moved all those debris all over Japan. Municipals accepted those debris with a lot of money and burned them. So Japan is now completely unnecessarily contaminated because of burning. And so that is a scandal. And I think some citizens are actually suing the government. But that doesn't go far. That's Chicago. I saw Chicago, who came here last year. And that's the Seki I showed him last year in my presentation. That was the guy who walked with the radioactive dirt to TEPCO. Yeah. So they met for the first time. They, met me at Koriyama Station. Next one, please. That's Chicago in her son's apartment. I spent the night there. She was cooking for change. Next one, please. That's Chicago's dog. The dog is now like a nomad. She's traveling with Chicago wherever she goes in her car. Really cute. Okay. And this is I think it was one of the videos that you showed. It was a Koriyama big convention center. Next one, please. And this is still convention center. Next one, please. That is the parking lot now became the temporary housing units. Yeah. So I actually visited one of these places with Chicago because Chicago says she knows somebody who lives there. Next one, please. It looks just like the one in the video, right? Next one, please. And these people, he was Chicago's elementary school classmate. And even though he's from Kawauchi, which is now classified as a safe place, one part of Kawauchi is still evacuation zone, closer to the reactor. And he, I think, owned a car dealership or something, business. But then they can't go back, and that's his wife. And next one, please. They came with a cat, 2 cats, actually. And they're living in, next one, please, tiny place. And he caught my attention because he said, these units, a lot of old folks are still living. Young people probably found their own apartment and just living elsewhere. But older people, just, senior citizens or whatever, they're, video called the pensioners living there. They are starving, he said, because now that the town, Kawauchi, is classified as returnable, there's no government support. But then people do not have the kind of support that they used to have in their life, which was food that they grew, the friends who drove them to hospital, whatever. So they're just left there without money. So he did the food drive for those old people living there.
So that word struck me when it was on the report, pensioners.
Yeah.
How is that word received, that label received in Japan? And has there been any other stigma surrounding it?
No, I mean people basically just old enough to receive pension, right?
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
pensioner.
Okay.
Yeah, there's no stigma.
All right.
No, they're just basically people of certain age.
Okay.
Yeah. But then what happened? I mean, they might not be wealthy people, but at least they had the land and they grew a little bit of vegetables, and they never bought rice. Some people never bought rice, bag of rice, and you know how significant that is. Once those are taken away from you. And then Luiko, I met Luiko, who's a woman who was in lead, complainer of the criminal charge against 33 TEPCO officials and scientists. She's tirelessly working, doing a lot of things. That's her boyfriend. But next one, please. And that's her office, volunteer help, young people, wonderful people, really great people. But next one, please. It's difficult because right in her town of Miharu, this is they're doing fierce decontamination work. You see those bales of radioactive dirt, right? They're cleaning up this site to next one, please. It's a little blurred, and it says this is a future site of prefectural center, environmental creation center. What that means, next one please, is that the IAEA and other entity pouring money and working with Fukushima Prefecture to build this enormously fabulous, expensive, I think they're going to have globe video screen or something, that the second in the world or something, to educate the public about radiation. Yeah, and monitor. And so this is what's happening. And so how do you counter that kind of a force? Which is very, this is right back in her,
Fukushima Disney World?
whatever. It's really bizarre, right? If it's pouring that kind of money into sort of making people feel good about being in Fukushima, they should be using the money for something else. So, I'm sorry, but there are so many other things that I can talk about, but yeah, I didn't want to just overwhelm myself or you today. This is just a little sampling of photos.
I'm curious what is happening with the trees and the vegetation around the reactors.
Oh, they're growing, but they're radioactive probably. Yeah.
Growing abnormal or not?
Well, I think some are abnormal. People do tell me they have seen just gigantic this or abnormal looking this. Those things are happening. Mutations, yes. Yeah. So.
And more mushrooms?
Mushrooms. I don't know if they're mutated, but mushrooms are one of the most radioactive things that you just don't want to eat.
No, but they are the cleaner of us.
What?
They clean things up.
They do, but they suck up so much that you don't want to eat them.
No,
yeah,
no, absolutely not. No.
Yeah.
Are your parents still going to
collect? Yeah. Maybe that's why I'm sick. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, I shouldn't say that. That's off the record. Yeah, sorry.
A couple of things. One, I wondered if there's any role for an international court. International court. And I also wondered if you had thoughts about things that we could do.
Well, you know what people ask me to, they want people here to help do the health study instead of relying on Japanese officials. But that requires a lot of coordination and money. And so you asked, so I answer. But I think that would be really helpful. But it's beyond myself, It's something that somebody with brilliant mind and and a lot of money can help. Because Japanese people, especially mothers, they don't trust the government.
The other thing I'm finding that you cannot even talk with people about Fukushima because they feel so hopeless. It's just interesting from what you put out and what you get back. It's like people don't want to hear about it.
You have to be very delicate about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think in Fukushima it's harder because there is so much pressure to the people who are painting rosy picture. to counter that takes a lot of energy. So it's easy to sort of feel like, okay, I'm going to shut up, right? But in my hometown, which is up north, some people are actually really actively working to just address a lot of problems. So I'm in a way lucky because I'm not from Fukushima. And when I go home, I'm surrounded by people, I mean, my friends and colleagues, who are actually doing a lot of good work. So, and then, who freely talk about it. So that's good.
So the last election that this new prime minister was elected in, this was a big issue. Was there somebody running against him who was for shutting down all the nuclear power plants permanently? And
apparently people are not voting on the platform of nuclear issue.
People did not vote on that platform, and they just voted
economy
for this guy.
The idea of strong Japan, people voting for.
But this was a governor, election of governor.
There was a recent one was the Tokyo governor.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
It wasn't
Tokyo
a
governor.
national election.
I thought it was a
A
national
local
election.
election.
No, what happened was the Tokyo governor had to resign at the end of last year because of money scandal, campaign financing scandal. So Tokyo governor, the next future host of Olympic Games, I guess had a little invitation to go to Sochi or something. It was vacant. The seat was vacant when Sochi Olympic game opened because they were trying to find a new governor.
As you've traveled around, have you found that social media has really helped make people aware when you go to talks like this? Do you feel that there is a
Yes,
movement?
definitely. I think that's how largely people communicate these days. Yeah.
Are you concerned about this shutting down of this video that came down, as we heard at the beginning, that this video was taken off of the internet?
I don't know anything about it, but I'm sure you can. I don't know. I shouldn't speculate about that.
It's weird because it was a media. It was from Australian news media. It wasn't. It was like just.
Maybe they had time limit. You think?
No, he had a whole series of them from Fukushima. This is the only one that disappeared. Maybe there's a technical thing. I mean, we don't know. But it's just odd. It just went. But it was the only one with a political title where you could really construe from the title that. And the other interesting thing about it is that he's been there for 3 years. It was the last video that he made, and I think he made it just to kind of said, I'm not going to be here anymore. I don't have to worry about what I'm going to say in this video.
Oh, I see. Wow.
May have come on more politically than he had in the other videos.
Well, okay.
Or chosen his subject.
Everything is political, right? Everything about nuclear power is political. But I just want to ask you if you can think of ways to change the paradigm in terms of cause and effect of radiation and all the health symptoms or whatever. How are we going to sort of turn the table upside down from the status quo, which is basically, it was forced on us, right? Somebody else created for us. It's really daunting, to try to do things from scratch. But that's, I think, some people in Japan encourages people who are working to do that.
You mean to create new power?
Yeah, paradigm. Just new sort of awareness, because we're not talking about compensation. Money cannot remedy things, and there's not enough money to go around. If you're trying to sort of compensate for loss of this and that. So forget money for now. But how can we say that the nuclear radiation makes people sick? It's a simple thing, but even that hasn't been allowed.
It's like trying to convince people that climate change is causing this to happen to the ocean and the glaciers. There's such a strong mental, political movement against the true information that it's almost impossible. We have the same problem here on so many issues.
So you see how I feel stuck,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
You need a regime change.
What?
A change in political regime.
Mm.
In other words, you have to get some new politicians because some of those people have been in for so long, and they're only gonna hire people that are as corrupt as they are. And so this is gonna keep going on until people start to rise up, and that's the only way you're gonna be able to change this paradigm.
I just think that
Political process.
even the people in power, they're shooting themselves in the foot because there is no safe place left, will be left. I mean,
Well,
this
if
keeps
you're gonna have to, shoot each other, gee, supply them with the ammunition.
Well, you say forget about the money, the compensation, but that's what drives the awareness. I mean, when people are saying, I'm sick because of this, then, that does tend to drive the debate in our societies. That's why I like to look at those court cases, because they do tend to change the way people think about cause and effect. I'm not saying it's the answer, obviously, but
you see,
the money.
yeah.
I mean, and also the money is costing to deal with the problem.
Well, I think in the 60s, 50s and 60s, our average people in this country were sold on the idea that we have to have nuclear power to keep our way of life, right? Right?
Too cheap to meter.
Yeah?
Too cheap to meter.
Too cheap?
What they were telling us, it's
Yeah.
going to be too cheap to meter.
Oh, God.
I think one of the things that's happening now, too, in terms of nuclear energy, is that people think it's inevitable that it's on its way out anyways, that it's a dying industry, and that they would rather put their energies towards making the world a better place, towards other things, and then fighting nuclear power overall and radiation.
Especially the young
Yeah,
people.
I'm also sensing that we have nuclear energy because of the nuclear war system. And as long as that is not there. I also feel a change happens within our own communities, and it's like unless we take the matter in our own hands and start looking at different ways of using energy. It's like I just kind of read that in Nigeria, 4 high school girls of 14 years old in a high school project made 6 hours of generator power from 1 liter of urine. So it's like, what can we do here, tinkering in our own, that we actually don't have these demands and start making change, because change only happens from the bottom up. It's like we cannot put other people in power and hope that they will take care of us. It's like we have to take matters in our own hands. Another thing that I heard, and I've only seen one substantiation of that, is like the whole thing about solar storms that knock out transformers, and there's like due to get every 150 years, and there's big one due in 2015, and my first thing was, they knock out nuclear plants. If it happens grand scale, what do we do for that? I mean, it once happened in New Jersey, they had a spare one and an idle reactor, and it's like, well, we don't even have communication means to even tell people how to leave a place or to evacuate, and that's kind of hanging above our heads. So that's just what I'm putting out. So it feels like, how can we even talk about these things that people even have? I think that in some ways we are so overcome by so much negativity on the planet. From where are the messages of hope? Where we can really create something else, and sometimes it pushes us to this limit that we actually start getting up and start thinking differently.
Gary, you want to say something?
I agree with what you just said. What I was going to suggest as an approach is to make it life-focused, to make it what is important to any individual. And if it is life that is important versus the economic well-being of a community that's important, or having more toys than your neighbor, if that's whatever's most important. But if life is the most important, that's an easy one to take, in my opinion, to take against anything radioactive. Because those things which are radioactive do not support life. I mean, they were man's attempt at splitting life.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
It's gone haywire.
You know, I've heard, maybe did I tell it? I've heard people say, this nuclear technology is all about splitting atom, right? Naturally, that kind of vibrates in human community too. Look how people are divided. And that's how one person in Fukushima said to me. This dividing energy.
Yeah.
I'd like to add a glimmer of hope.
Yeah? Glimmer of hope?
Since about December, I've been a part of a television show on local TV
Yep,
called Energy Week
yep.
with a guy named George Harvey, who does a tremendous amount of research every week. Leslie's been on the show a couple of times. And basically, he writes a blog, and his show is like the best of the blog. But what it has caused me to do is become much more aware of a lot of these energy issues, because I have to be aware of them. If I don't study them myself, George is going to study them and hear them on the show. And a point I want to bring up is I have noticed recently in some financial mainstream media, like Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, experts telling investors that nuclear and coal are no longer good investments.
Oh, interesting.
This is just starting.
Yep.
It's just starting. And you can see people are resisting it that are in these industries. But these are people who are trying, they're trying to see what the future is. And they're saying, okay, guys, these have been good investments up until now, but those days are over. Start looking for something else. And oh, by the way, renewables are starting to look a lot better than they used to. So there's a glimmer of hope there, and it's coming from the investor class. It's not coming from the local people. Which,
sure.
You got to admit, they have more power than
I know
people
money
like
makes the world, go around, right?
So there may be a glimmer of hope there.
Randy?
I don't know if this constitutes a glimmer of hope or not. I thought it would be interesting for people to know that our friend Robbie Lepser, who most people in this room know, who has been filming various things having to do with Vermont Yankee for, 2 or 3 years now, and has, on a grant from PBS, has been asked by NKH, is that
NHK.
NHK, the largest Japanese
It's a
public television station, to edit a special shorter version of his film, which isn't completed, to be shown next month by NKH, is it? NHK. Yeah, and producers from there have just spent a week here with Robbie going over the editing, and he feels that somehow for them to be putting this on is a major, for it to be allowed to be shown, this protest activity.
I was told by Japanese videographers and journalists that NHK, some people in NHK feel, the sense of commitment to what's happening. And yet at the top level, it's very, it's a different story.
That's what the people who came here told Robbie.
So, but then, so some of the stuff might be cut on the floor, on the floor, as long as though, if the material is about foreign country, not Fukushima, they probably can show. That's what they say.
Well, I remember, and I bet everybody who's been at the vigils, the Fukushima vigils, NHK came to our vigils.
They did?
Yes.
Yeah.
NHK came to our vigils in
way.
Vernon. Yeah. More than once they
Oh.
came to protest.
Okay.
Here. I don't know if it ever got shown in Japan, but they sent, they had guys who were based, I think, in New York.
Oh, interesting.
Who came up here to film more than once.
So it's ironic that the Vermont's being sort of used by in a good way, by the Japanese media. So anyway, we should wrap up, don't you think?
Well, just on the media.
Okay.
They flow around it. Also, Beyond Nuclear is working with a French company, and they're making a film about decommissioning Germany, France, and the United States. And part of that film will include the flotilla.
I thought it was more about waste.
Oh, waste?
I think it's actually a film, I think it's about how they handle waste and how they try to, because it's about, France's unsuccessful attempts at supposedly recycling their waste and what Germany's doing with waste and what the U.S. is. But, and that all three countries were not successful at their management of waste. Well, it should be ready to be shown soon.
in our life, I mean, our lives are changed by the accident, and my life certainly got changed, but I'm not really just meant to be doing this kind of work. I'm not a public speaker, I don't want to be. But if I had my druthers, I had my time and money, I think I would probably go to some areas in Japan, work with people who are already doing research, and document all those deformities. Just with my own eyes and pencil, or whatever. That's what I like to do. Because, you know, what's real is real. And every little life, I think, is sacred. So that's what I want to do. But right now, I don't seem to have either money or time. Go ahead.
You just mentioned that the changing paradigm. I mean, nothing does that more than film. Particularly, there's so many great directors in Japan, and when you dramatize these stories, as I guess people must be working on, I haven't seen any dramas, but that can tend to change vast perception. And also, there's that film, The Horses of Fukushima, that's been playing internationally, and it gets to that heart, that heart of the place.
Actually, remember Kama, film director I brought a couple of years ago?
Yes.
She, woman. She, her film 2 years ago called about internal radiation exposure. It's been out for 2 years, and I assembled a team of helpers last year, and I myself went to Dartmouth College's Media Center and made subtitles. So now it's been finally edited, and so I think I'm waiting to receive the DVD any minute. So because I did the work, I can show free in this area. So would you like to see it?
Yes.
Yeah. But as soon as I get, I'll let you know. Yeah.
And just today, an Academy of Sciences with Dr. Joe Mangano just released a study of radiation from nuclear reactors using Diablo Canyon as the research study piece. Joe Mangano has been working on this for decades.
Right.
And they just came out with their report now. And supposedly it does prove that there is radiation that comes from nuclear power plants just by localized just by them sitting there without. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.